The sun beat down on the Arizona territory with a fierce and unrelenting glare, turning the dry earth into dust and the wide skies into a sheet of blinding blue. It was the 1880s, and the frontier was still wild, unforgiving in its beauty, dangerous in its isolation. This was not a land for the faint of heart. Life clung to the edges of water and willpower, and those who survived here had earned their scars. Between the scattered outposts of settlers and the ancestral lands of the Apache, tension simmered like heat waves over the canyon. Treaties came and went, broken as easily as promises, and misunderstanding ruled the space between cultures. Each side bore wounds, each carried fear, and every quiet morning could turn deadly with the echo of a rifle shot among the scattered. Foothills in the shaded folds of pine-covered ridges lived Lena, a young Apache woman of 17 summers. She was not yet considered a full adult by the customs of her people, but her eyes had already seen too much. Her father, once a respected scout, had been killed by a militia patrol during a mistaken raid. Her mother had passed a year later, worn thin by grief and the harsh winters. With no siblings and few living relatives, Lena lived alone in a modest wickiup on the edge of the tribal lands, yet Lena was not completely cut off. She had a quiet, fierce independence, a spirit that sometimes took her near the white settlements, not out of rebellion, but out of curiosity. She did not speak English well, but she understood it. Occasionally, she traded herbs or baskets in secret with an old Mexican woman on the outskirts of the settlement. These were dangerous acts. Some Apaches saw them as betrayal. Some settlers saw her very presence as a threat. Lena walked a narrow trail, invisible to both worlds, yet never fully part of either. To Lena, the land was her true kin. She knew every bend of the stream that threaded through the valley, every cactus bloom and hawk cry. She moved silently through the underbrush, as much a part of the landscape as the shifting winds. But lately, something had changed. There were more riders on the trails, rough men with whiskey breath and twitchy fingers, not soldiers, not Apaches, strangers, desperate men who didn't care for law or land. Bandits, Lena thought. Predators. Further west, across a long stretch of arid grassland, sat a lonely ranch nestled in a shallow basin of hills. It was a sturdy but unremarkable place, a square house of adobe brick, a modest barn, and a corral with 2 horses. The kind of place where dust settled fast and memories settled even deeper. Here lived Daniel Grady, a man shaped by war and hardened by solitude. A former Union soldier who had come west after the war, Daniel had tried his hand at ranching, seeking peace in the silence of the desert. His wife, Anna, had died 3 years after they arrived, a victim of fever that came and went like a thief in the night. Their infant son had followed her a few days later. Since then, Daniel had spoken little and trusted even less. He'd become a man of few words and fewer visitors. The ranch kept him alive, but barely. The days were all the same, long, hot, and filled with the monotony of chores. He fixed fences, broke wild horses, and listened to the coyotes cry in the distance. The war had taken his youth, and the desert had taken what was left of his heart. He hadn't smiled in years, not a real one. Daniel had seen Apache riders from time to time, watched them from a distance as they crossed the ridges like shadows. He didn't shoot unless he had reason, but he kept his rifle close, always. Neither Daniel nor Lena knew it yet, but their paths were moving steadily toward each other. Fate or chance, whichever force the land answered to, was bringing them together. And it would not happen through peace or comfort. It would start with a child's cry echoing through the canyon. It would begin with a split-second choice, one that Lena would make at the risk of her life. The frontier had little room for softness. But sometimes, in the spaces between violence and vengeance, something else could take root. Something just as stubborn as hate. Love, perhaps. Or redemption. But first came the danger, and the desert was watching. The wind shifted that afternoon, whispering through the canyons like a warning. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long, jagged shadows. Across the land, Lena crouched on the hillside, fingers deftly plucking sprigs of wild medicine, yarrow, sage, and devil's claw. She moved with care, her ears attuned to the rhythm of the land. But today, something felt wrong. A sound reached her ears, distant at first, but growing louder. Hooves, fast and frantic. She rose slowly, climbing to a rocky ledge for a better view. Her sharp eyes caught movement in the distance. A wagon caravan, maybe 5 in total, heading west through the canyon trail. Settlers. Judging by the shape of their wagons and the way they clustered. But they weren't alone. Trailing. Behind and flanking the canyon's ridgeline were a group of men on horseback, a half-dozen or more, their outlines dark and ragged. They didn't ride like soldiers or scouts. There was no order, no flags. These were raiders, bandits. Lena's breath caught. She knew how quickly things could turn. The settlers were blind to the threat above them, boxed in by the canyons. High walls, no room to turn around, nowhere to run. A sudden crack echoed off the rock, the sharp report of a rifle. Then chaos. The riders descended like wolves. Gunfire ringing out across the canyon. Screams followed, men shouting, horses rearing, wagons buckling as terrified mules tried to bolt. The canyon funneled the sound, making it feel closer than it was. Lena crouched low, heart hammering. She was too far to intervene, and too smart to reveal herself, and yet a smaller sound cut through the clamor. It wasn't a gunshot or a scream. It was a child's cry, shrill, frightened, unmistakably alone. Lena scanned the trail. One wagon had tipped into the brush, broken and burning. A few figures ran into the hills, chased by gunmen. But near the edge of the canyon, just out of view of the attackers, a small form crawled from beneath an overturned supply cart. A little girl, maybe 5 or 6, covered in dust, blood on her forehead. Clutching a ragged doll, the child stumbled toward the slope, crying, then fell. Lena didn't think. She moved. Sliding down the backside of the hill, she ducked between boulders and shrubs, careful to avoid loose gravel. Her footsteps were silent, her form low. She knew the canyon like a hawk knew the wind, every dip and rise etched into her memory. The bandits were still focused on looting the remaining wagons. She had minutes, maybe less. Reaching the girl, Lena dropped to her knees. The child flinched and screamed when she saw her. Dark skin, dark braids, Apache features. To the little girl, Lena might have looked like the stories whispered in Settler. Holmes, savage, dangerous. But Lena gently placed a finger to her lips and spoke softly in broken English. "Shh. I help. Quiet. Bad men close?" The girl froze, staring. She didn't understand all the words, but she recognized the tone. Lena picked her up, wincing at the fresh gash across the child's leg, and turned back toward the ridge. A new sound rumbled in the distance, thunder, but not from the sky. She looked up. Dark clouds were rolling fast over the mountains. A monsoon storm, sudden and brutal, was about to fall. The canyon would flood. If they didn't climb out now, they'd drown. Lena pushed her body harder than she ever had. The girl clung to her neck, sobbing quietly, blood soaking Lena's tunic. The air turned electric, heavy with the scent of ozone. Then came the rain. It didn't start with a drizzle. It came in sheets, roaring down the walls of the canyon like a curse. The dry earth, parched and cracked for months, couldn't hold it. Water began pooling fast, then rushing into streams. Lena slipped once, catching herself with her free hand. The other wrapped tightly around the child. Behind her, the canyon began to groan, a deep, guttural sound as if the land itself were warning her to run. She reached the top of the ridge just as the first wave of water surged through the canyon floor below, sweeping away what was left of the broken wagons. One of the outlaws screamed. Before vanishing into the current, the child sobbed against her chest. Lena held her tightly, sheltering her under an overhang until the worst of the rain passed. Her heart pounded, not just from exertion, but from the truth settling into her bones. She had just saved a white child from certain death, in the middle of an outlaw raid, while wearing the face of someone most settlers feared. If they saw her now, they might shoot her before asking questions. She had a choice: leave the child and disappear, or risk everything to get her to safety. She looked down at the girl in her arms, small, helpless, clinging to her like she was the only safe thing left in the world. Lena made her decision. She would find help, even if it killed her. The sky still wept as Lena made her way down the long, winding slope toward the basin. The storm had passed, but the land remained soaked and trembling like a wounded animal. Mud clung to her legs with every step. She moved carefully but quickly, cradling the child against her chest, one hand steadying the girl's head, the other gripping a walking stick she'd fashioned from a broken branch. The girl had stopped crying. Her eyes were wide, glazed with shock. Her name, Lena had learned, was Emily. She'd murmured it once during the climb, along with a single broken sentence: "My uncle, ranch, horses." It was enough. Lena had passed a small ranch before, not far from the edge of Apache territory, nestled in a low valley framed by hills. She had never dared approach it, but she remembered it well. A lonely place with no flag, no guards, and just one man, tall, silent, always watching from his porch like a hawk. That would be their destination. The sun was low now, dipping toward the ridge. Lena moved with urgency. Every hour the girl went without treatment, the greater the risk. She had bound Emily's leg with a strip of cloth from her own dress, packed the wound with crushed yarrow leaves to fight infection, and whispered to her in both Apache and English to stay awake. But the girl's small body was fading fast, pale and limp in her arms. By the time the ranch house came into view, dusk had settled over the land like a slow sigh. Smoke drifted from a small chimney. The horses stood quietly in the corral. A lantern flickered behind the front window. Lena stopped under the shadow of a juniper tree to catch her breath. She hesitated. This could end badly. White men did not open their doors to Apache women. Many would shoot first, no matter what she carried in her arms. But leaving the girl outside overnight would be a death sentence. Lena stepped from the tree line. Every muscle in her body tensed. She walked openly, arms raised. Emily limp against her shoulder. Daniel Grady sat in his rocker on the porch, watching the sun sink. He had just finished mending a saddle strap when he spotted the figure. At first, it didn't make sense. A woman, small, dark-haired, soaked from the storm, carrying something. Then he saw the child. He was on his feet before his mind caught up. The rifle leaning against the doorframe was in his hands in seconds, a reflex, as deep as breathing. He leveled it at the woman, heart pounding. "Stop right there," he barked. The woman froze. She turned her body sideways, showing the child more clearly. "She hurt," the woman said, her accent thick but words clear. "Bad hurt. Need help." Daniel blinked. Apache. God help him. But the girl, he recognized her. "Emily?" he called, stepping off the porch. The girl stirred weakly and lifted her head. "Uncle Danny." Daniel dropped the rifle. He ran the rest of the way, his boots splashing through the wet dirt. Lena didn't flinch when he reached for the child. though every instinct in her screamed to run. But the fear in his eyes wasn't for her, it was for the little girl in her arms. "She need doctor," Lena said. "Leg bad, head cut. I try help, not enough." Daniel nodded, hardly hearing. He took the girl, held her close, then looked at Lena for the first time, really looked. Mud on her face, blood on her dress, scratches across her arms, and something else in her eyes. Exhaustion, pain, courage. "You saved her," he said, almost to himself. Lena nodded, too tired to explain more. He looked at the rifle still lying in the dirt, then back at her. "I won't shoot," he said quietly. "You can come inside." Lena hesitated. No one had ever said that to her before, not in English. Not like that, Dot, but she followed. Inside, the house was simple, clean, sparse, the smell of tobacco and old wood. Daniel laid Emily on the sofa and called out to someone, a neighbor, a doctor, someone down the road. Lena knelt beside the girl, checking her bandage. She worked in silence, efficient and calm. Daniel watched, uncertain of what to say. Grateful, suspicious, confused. But beneath all that was something undeniable. She had risked her life for the child, and that meant something, more than he could understand yet. Daniel Grady stood at the edge of the room, arms crossed, watching the Apache girl work. The storm had passed. The house was quiet except for the soft crackle of fire and the faint breathing of his niece, Emily, who now slept beneath a wool blanket. But Daniel's heart was still thundering. He couldn't make sense of what he was. Seeing the woman, no, the girl, had done more in 20 minutes than most trained nurses. She had cleaned Emily's wounds, changed her bandages, boiled water without being told, and placed cool cloths on the child's forehead to keep the fever from rising. Her hands were quick, her movements precise, and she hadn't asked for a single thing, but she was Apache. And Daniel Grady didn't trust easily. He had fought in the war. He had seen too many graves dug into dry earth, too many lives taken by sudden violence. After the war, he had come west for peace, only to find another kind of battlefield, ranchers against raiders, settlers against tribes, law against lawlessness. His wife had always said the war had stolen the softness from his voice. Maybe she was right. And now here stood this girl, barefoot and soaked, dirt on her cheek, blood on her sleeve, in his home with his niece alive because of her. He didn't know what to feel. Lena could feel his eyes on her like the weight of a stone. She didn't blame him. She had seen that look many times before, not anger, exactly. Not fear either, suspicion, the kind that had been taught to him long ago and never questioned since. She kept her head down, focusing on her work, knowing one wrong move could turn his gratitude into something colder. After a while, Daniel spoke. "What were you doing out there?" His voice was rough, but not harsh. "Gathering herbs," Lena said, not looking up. "Saw wagon. Heard shots. Then?" "The girl?" Daniel nodded slowly, chewing on the inside of his cheek. "And you thought it'd be a good idea to bring her here? You know, most men wouldn't have opened the door." "Yes," Lena said simply. He studied her for a moment. "You always take those kinds of chances?" Lena looked up at last. Her eyes were calm, steady. "Only when someone needs help." That silenced him. She returned to tending Emily while Daniel poured coffee into 2 tin mugs. He offered her one. She took it with a nod of thanks, hands warming around the metal. "Your name?" he asked. "Lena?" She nodded. "That is enough." He accepted that. Sat down across from her, cradling his cup. "She's my niece, my sister's girl. Came out on a supply wagon. I was going to pick her up at the station tomorrow." He ran a hand down his face, suddenly looking much older than he had hours ago. "If you hadn't found her, she is strong," Lena said softly. "She will live." Daniel stared into the fire for a long while, listening to the wind rattle the shutters. After some time, he rose, took a quilt from the cabinet, and laid it out on the floor near the hearth. "You can sleep here," he said. "Just for tonight. It's too dangerous to go out now." Lena hesitated, not because of the offer, but because of the way he said it, like it cost him something, still. She nodded. "Thank you." That night, Daniel barely slept. He kept his rifle within reach and his ear tuned to every creak of the floorboards. The girl, Lena, hadn't made a sound since she lay down. No snoring, no tossing. Just stillness. He didn't know what troubled him more, that she was Apache, or that she didn't seem afraid at all. He told himself he was only being cautious, that it was smart to be wary. But a part of him, a quieter, older part, remembered the way she had held Emily, the way she had run straight into danger, without knowing who that child was, or if anyone would thank her. That part of him wondered. Something else entirely. What kind of person does that? Lena, lying on the quilt, stared at the ceiling beams. Wide awake Dot, she knew this wasn't over. Someone would come looking for the girl. The outlaws, maybe, or the settlers. And when they did, would this man still stand between her and their guns? She didn't know. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, she wasn't alone. And somehow, that mattered. By morning, the rain had vanished, leaving the land soaked and steaming beneath a clear sky. The storm had washed everything clean. The dirt paths, the corral, even the tired roof of Daniel Grady's ranch house. But inside, the air remained. Heavy Daniel woke early, as he always did. He dressed in silence and brewed coffee. Trying not to wake the two figures still sleeping in the parlor, Lena, curled up beneath the quilt, and little Emily, now breathing easier, her fever broken. During the night, he glanced at Lena Dot. She hadn't moved much, but her hand still rested near the girl, as if she had spent the night ready to shield her from anything. He didn't know what to make of her. Daniel had grown up believing in lines, good and bad, law and lawless, civilized and savage. But this girl didn't fit any of them. She had appeared out of nowhere, carried his niece away from death, tended to her like a sister, and asked for nothing in return. Now she slept on his floor like it was nothing, like she belonged nowhere and expected nothing. When Lena stirred, Daniel was already on the porch, sharpening a knife. She stepped outside barefoot, arms folded against the morning chill. Her braid was undone, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked different, softer, but alert. "You hungry?" he asked, not looking up. "Yes." He motioned toward a wooden crate. "There's beans in the pot. Bread's yesterday's. Still good enough." She nodded, took the food without thanks. Not out of rudeness, but because gratitude wasn't something you wore on your sleeve. They ate in silence, watching the horses stretch in the corral and the sunlight push across the hills. It wasn't friendship. Not yet. But it wasn't hostility either. It was a truce. Later that morning, Daniel saddled one of his horses. "I'm riding to town," he said. "Tell the sheriff what happened. Tell Emily's aunt she's here and safe." Lena didn't respond at first. Her jaw tensed slightly. "If you tell sheriff about me, I know what happens," he said. "They'd arrest you, or worse." She met his eyes. "Are you going to?" Daniel looked away. No. The words surprised him as much as her, but it felt right. He didn't owe her anything, but somehow, telling the truth, that she was the one who saved Emily, also felt like too much risk. The sheriff didn't care for nuance. Most folks in town wouldn't either. "I'll say I found her near the canyon after the raid," he added. "That she crawled her way out and made it here. They'll believe that." Lena nodded, accepting it. Not grateful, not angry. Just resigned. The way someone gets when they've been erased before. Daniel mounted his horse, paused. You'll stay? If she wakes, she needs someone. He nodded once and rode off. Lena spent most of the day tending to the girl and walking the perimeter of the ranch. She moved like a ghost, quiet, cautious, observant. She wasn't used to being idle, and she didn't trust safety that felt too easy. In the barn, she found a broken saddle and began repairing it with leather strips and a needle from Daniel's workbench. When she wasn't checking on Emily, she was working, trying to make herself useful or at least not suspicious. When Daniel returned that evening, he found his saddle fixed, the porch swept, and Emily sitting up, groggy but smiling faintly. She woke up a few hours ago, Lena said, stepping aside as he came in. No fever. He knelt beside the girl and touched her cheek gently. Hey, her eyes lit up. Lena stayed. Daniel glanced at the girl beside him. Yeah, he said softly. She did. They shared dinner together, the first proper meal the three of them had eaten in days. Emily talked a little, Lena mostly listened, and Daniel watched them both. He still didn't trust the situation. He still didn't know who Lena really was. But he couldn't ignore what he saw. A girl who didn't flinch from danger. A child who trusted her completely. And a quietness in himself he hadn't felt in years, like something broken had shifted slightly. Trying to realign, after Emily fell asleep again, Daniel and Lena sat out on the porch beneath a sky scattered with stars. You can't stay here forever, he said eventually. I know. But for now, it's all right. She looked at him, unsure whether to believe it. But she didn't argue. Instead, she said, Thank you for not lying about me to her. Daniel didn't answer. Not right away. Then he said, Maybe someday. I won't lie to the others either. They sat in silence again, two strangers sharing a porch, and a truth neither had the words for yet. The days that followed passed quietly, unusually so for the Arizona frontier. The sun was fierce, but the wind stayed cool, and for a while the ranch seemed wrapped in a fragile peace. Emily healed fast. Kids always did. Within 3 days, she was walking around the small parlor in bare feet, dragging her doll behind her. Like a shadow. She followed Lena everywhere, mimicking her movements, echoing her quiet way of speaking. And Lena, though she didn't show it openly, seemed softened by the child's attention. She taught Emily how to grind corn, how to listen for lizards in the brush, and how to braid her own hair with steady hands. Daniel watched it all from a distance, caught in a quiet storm of questions. He didn't know what to make of Lena. She still didn't smile much, but he'd caught her humming once. She rose early, worked hard, and never asked for anything. But she avoided mirrors, flinched at distant gunshots, and sometimes stared out at the hills like she expected something, or someone, to come for her. One evening, while Emily napped, Daniel found Lena out by the corral, fixing a broken fence post. She worked with focused hands, tying wire with more skill than most ranch hands he'd hired over the years. You've done this before, he said, stepping up beside her. She didn't look at him. My father taught me. He worked with horses, not just wild ones. Daniel leaned against the fence, arms folded. He was a wrangler? A scout, she corrected. Long time ago, before soldiers turned on him. There was no anger in her voice, just fact. Daniel hesitated, then said, You don't have to keep quiet, you know? I'm not asking questions to trap you. Lena tied off the last piece of wire and stood up. You are full of questions. He shrugged. Can you blame me? No, she said honestly, but answers don't change anything. Daniel looked at her closely. Maybe not, but sometimes they explain things. A silence stretched between them, heavy but not hostile. Lena turned, leaning against the fence now too. The desert wind blew gently across the field, carrying the scent of dry sage and distant rain. "My mother died in winter," she said suddenly. "2 winters ago. She was sick a long time. I tried everything I knew. It wasn't enough." Daniel listened. "My father died before that, killed during a raid he didn't start. The army said it was a mistake. Wrong camp." Her voice was thin but steady. He had worked with white men. He trusted too much. Daniel didn't move. "After that," she continued, "the elders left me alone. Not punished, not protected. Just left." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You've been on your own since?" She nodded. "I hunted, traded, kept to myself, until—" She paused, glancing back toward the house. "Until I heard a child cry." He didn't say anything right away. When he finally did, it was quiet. "My wife and boy died of fever 5 years ago. Middle of the night. Nothing I did helped either." Lena looked at him, surprised. "I thought this place would fix something in me," he went on. "All it did was make me quieter, meaner sometimes." "You don't seem mean." "You haven't seen me angry," he replied, not proudly. "But I was, at everyone, especially God." They stood in silence again, no longer strangers, not quite friends. "Emily. She saved me too," he added. "I didn't know it until—" "Now," Lena turned back toward the house, "she's strong. Like her uncle." He chuckled under his breath. "Don't be so sure." When their eyes met again, it was different. Something unspoken passed between them. Not romance, not yet, but recognition. Two people who had lost everything, yet were still standing. Still trying. Daniel shifted his weight, suddenly unsure of what to say next. "You ever think of leaving?" he asked. Lena looked toward the hills. "Yes," she said. "But now, I don't know where I'd go." Daniel nodded slowly. "Well, you're safe here, as long as I'm breathing." She looked at him for a long moment. "Thank you," she said softly. And for the first time since arriving at the ranch, she smiled. Peace on the frontier never lasted. It had been nearly a week since Lena arrived at the ranch. Emily's wounds were healing. Laughter had returned to the parlor, and the silences between Lena and Daniel had grown less heavy, more companionable. They spoke in short sentences, traded stories and fragments, and sometimes just sat together on the porch while Emily chased lizards in the dust. But the horizon was always watching. And danger, once stirred, has a way of circling back. It was a quiet afternoon when it came. Daniel was working the far fence line, hammering posts, while Lena was in the kitchen slicing dried meat for stew. Emily napped in the corner chair, her doll wrapped in a torn flour sack like a blanket. The air was dry and still, the kind of stillness that made even the birds fall silent. Then came the sound. Hooves. Not one horse, several. Lena's head snapped. Up. She moved fast, the way a deer moves when it hears the first crack of a branch. Out the door, onto the porch, scanning the trail that curved toward the ranch. 3 riders. Dust trailing behind them. Wrong kind of saddles. Wrong kind of posture. These weren't townsfolk. These were men used to riding hard and living worse. Her stomach dropped. She knew the one in front, even from this distance. He'd been among the outlaws at the canyon. Colt Brannigan. White man, mustache thick as a brush, scar across his temple. She'd seen him gunning down settlers that day, wild-eyed, shouting orders, taking whatever wasn't nailed down. He was the kind who didn't leave loose ends, and she was a loose end. She turned back inside. "Emily, hide, now." The girl blinked sleepily. "What?" Lena knelt and took her shoulders firmly. "Behind the woodbin. Stay quiet. Don't move until I say." Emily nodded, suddenly alert, reading the seriousness in Lena's face. She scurried to the hiding spot as Lena grabbed Daniel's rifle from beside the door. She checked it, loaded, then stepped outside, eyes locked on the riders as they slowed at the edge of the yard. Colt grinned wide when he saw her. "Well now," he called, reining in. "Ain't this a surprise? I figured you ran for the hills." Lena said nothing. The rifle stayed steady in her hands, but her pulse thundered. "You've been busy, Apache girl. We saw what was left in the canyon. Thought you might have died with the rest." He leaned in his saddle. "But you didn't. You took something that belonged to me." "She wasn't yours," Lena said. He chuckled. "Everything in that wagon was mine once the drivers hit the dirt. That's how the frontier works. Don't they teach you that?" Behind her, she heard fast steps. Daniel returning. She didn't turn. She didn't have to. He stepped onto the porch beside her, shotgun in hand, face like stone. "You're not welcome here," Daniel said. Colt's smile faded. "This don't concern you, rancher." Daniel's voice didn't waver. "You're 3 against 2. Doesn't sound like great odds. Until you remember one of us is a crack shot and the other has nothing left to lose." Colt stared at him, then at Lena. Something shifted in his eyes. He didn't expect resistance, especially not this kind, not from a white rancher standing beside a girl with Apache braids. "You're protecting her?" Colt spat. "After what her kind did to your people?" "She saved my niece," Daniel said coldly, "while you were murdering innocent families." Colt's jaw twitched. His hand inched toward his belt. "You don't know what you're doing, friend." "I know exactly what I'm doing." Lena raised the rifle, cocked it. Colt froze. Behind him, the other 2 men exchanged glances. They weren't ready for a fight. Not here. Not now. Colt looked between the 2, the Apache girl with fire in her eyes, and the rancher who stood beside her like a storm. He spat in the dirt. "Fine, keep the girl. But this ain't over." Then he turned his horse and rode off. The others followed. The dust settled slowly behind them. Daniel exhaled. Lena lowered the rifle, her hands shaking now. Not from fear, from release. She turned to him. "You didn't have to stand with me." Daniel looked at her. "Yes, I did." She blinked. No one had ever said that before. Not and meant it. Inside, Emily peeked from behind the wood bin. "Is it over?" she whispered. Lena knelt and opened her arms. "For now, little one." The child ran to her and Lena held her close. But in her heart, she knew Colt would be back. And next time, they'd have to be ready. The desert doesn't forget threats. Neither did Daniel. After Colt Brannigan and his men rode off, a heavy silence settled over the ranch, the kind that comes after a warning, the kind that said, "This isn't over." Daniel didn't waste time. The next morning, he was up before the sun, digging into his supplies, checking ammunition, reinforcing the window shutters. He moved with grim focus, like a soldier slipping back into old habits. Because that's exactly what he was, a soldier who'd buried his rifle years ago, and now had to dig it up again. Lena joined him without a word. She knew danger when she saw it. She knew men like Brannigan didn't bluff. She'd seen it too many times. A warning given not to avoid violence, but to invite it. Together, they turned the ranch into a fortress. They fortified the barn doors with iron bars, set traps in the brush near the trail, took turns scouting the ridgelines at dusk. Daniel taught Lena how to handle his shotgun. Lena showed Daniel how to set Apache snares and read tracks in the sand. They moved like 2 sides of the same coin, different worlds, same instincts, and Emily, small but sharp, helped where she could. She gathered water, stacked kindling, fed the horses. Lena kept her close when Daniel left the house, and Daniel didn't object. The girl had become something of a bridge between them, a shared reason to fight. Still, the waiting was hard. 3 days passed, then 4, then 5, and just when the silence began to feel like safety again, they came. It was just after sundown. when the sound of hooves returned, not fast this time, but slow and deliberate. 6 riders, their outlines lit by the last red glow of daylight, stopped just beyond the fence line. Colt Brannigan was at the center, rifle slung across his saddle. A wide smirk under his dust-covered mustache. Daniel and Lena were already on the porch, guns loaded. "Evenin', friends," Colt called, as if he were greeting neighbors. "Thought I'd give you one last chance to hand over what don't belong to you." Daniel didn't answer. Neither did Lena. The silence stretched. Colt laughed. "All right then. Don't say I didn't try polite." He raised his hand, and the men behind him spread out. 2 flanked left, 2 right, 1 dismounted and began creeping toward the barn. Daniel's voice rang out. "Last warning. Step off this land." The answer came in gunfire. A shot cracked from the tree line, grazing the porch column just inches from Lena's head. She didn't flinch. She dropped to a knee, took aim, and fired back. The first outlaw fell sideways off his horse with a shout. Chaos erupted. The ranch lit up with muzzle flashes and thunder. Bullets splintered the porch rail, shattered a window. Horses screamed. Somewhere near the barn, one of the snares snapped and a man cursed violently. Caught by the leg. Daniel fired from behind a stack of barrels, hitting one of the flankers in the shoulder. Lena moved like smoke, circling wide to the side of the house, dropping to her belly and firing from under the porch skirting. Inside, Emily stayed down, just as she'd been taught, under the heavy table, clutching her doll and whispering prayers she barely remembered. Colt shouted to his men to pull back, but they were already bleeding, caught off guard. This was no simple robbery. This was a war they hadn't prepared for. Lena spotted Colt as he tried to retreat and raised her rifle. A shot cracked out from behind her. Not Colt's. One of the outlaws had doubled back. The bullet slammed into Lena's side, knocking her to the ground. "Lena!" Daniel shouted, rising up from cover. He dropped the last rider with a clean shot to the chest, then ran to her. Blood darkened her tunic, but she was breathing, conscious, gritting her teeth. "I'm fine," she whispered. "You're not," he said, pressing a cloth to the wound. "Stay with me." The surviving outlaws fled, Colt among them, this time without a word. Retreat, not retreating to fight again, retreating to run. Daniel carried Lena inside, laid her gently on the table. Emily watched, eyes wide, as he worked to stop the bleeding, voice shaking with panic and something else. Fear of losing something he hadn't realized mattered so much. "You saved us," he said softly, holding her hand. Lena looked up at him, her lips pale. "So did you." Their fingers remained clasped as her breathing steadied. And in that blood-smeared kitchen, beneath the flickering lantern light, something deeper took root. Not just survival, not just trust, but love forged in fire. Word travels fast in the territory. Faster than a bullet, faster than a promise. By the time Lena could sit up without wincing, by the time Daniel's knuckles healed from splinters and fists, and by the time Emily was laughing again in the corral, the rumors had already reached town. Apache girl hiding at the Grady Ranch. He's protecting her, feeding her, might even be sleeping with her. The same one who lured the wagon into that canyon massacre. They say none of it was true, except the part that mattered. Daniel was protecting her. And everyone in town seemed to think that was the real betrayal. When Daniel rode into town for supplies, he felt it in the way people stared, longer than necessary, eyes narrowed. The store clerk who used to offer him free tobacco pretended not to see him. The blacksmith muttered something under his breath as Daniel passed. The sheriff, usually full of idle chatter, just gave him a tight nod and walked away. Even old Mrs. Weller, who used to send sugar cookies up with the mail, glanced at his saddlebags like she expected to see war paint tucked inside. Back at the ranch, Lena noticed the change too. A rider passed by the ridge every afternoon now, not fast. Enough to be a threat, but not far enough to be innocent. And one morning, someone had left a broken arrow in the gatepost. Deliberate. A message. But the worst came from Lena's own people. 3 men from her old village arrived one evening at dusk while Daniel was out checking the east fence. They said nothing at first, just stood at the edge of the yard, arms folded, watching her. Lena stepped out to meet them. The oldest, a man named Dakota, spoke first. "We heard you live with a white man now, sleep under his roof, guard his child." Lena stood tall. "I saved that child when no one else did." "And what does he give you in return?" One of the younger ones sneered. "Clothes? Sugar? Or just a place in his bed?" Lena's jaw tightened. "He gave me a name when everyone else gave me silence. He gave me safety when you turned your backs." Dakota's eyes softened slightly, but not enough. "Your loyalty now belongs to them?" "No," Lena said. "My loyalty belongs to those who don't see me as a problem to erase." The younger men spat at the ground and walked away. Dakota lingered for a breath longer. "You can't stand on both sides of the river, Lena," he said. "The current will take you." Then he, too, turned and left. When Daniel returned and saw her face, pale, lips tight, hands shaking slightly, he didn't ask what had happened. He just sat next to her on the porch steps and passed her a cup of coffee. They sat in silence until the moon came up. Finally, Daniel said, "You don't owe anyone anything. Not them. Not this town." Lena nodded slowly, "But I'll never be enough for either." Daniel turned toward her. "You're enough for me." She didn't reply. Not with words. Just reached over and took his hand. A few days later, the sheriff rode up the trail. Daniel met him at the gate. Lena stayed inside, watching from the window, rifle within reach. "Just came to talk," the sheriff said, removing his hat. "Towns uneasy. Brannigan's still out there. People are scared. When they're scared, they blame easy targets." "Lena's not a target," Daniel said. "She's a person, and she saved my niece's life." "I know," the sheriff said quietly. "But folks don't like what they don't understand." Daniel leaned on the gatepost. "They don't have to understand. They just have to stay off my land." The sheriff sighed. "You're making things harder than they have to be." Daniel shook his head. "I'm finally doing something right for once. That's not hard. That's clarity." The sheriff studied him a moment longer, then nodded. Double quotes, "Just be careful, Grady. When people decide someone doesn't belong, they don't always ask permission before acting on it." He rode off without another word. That night, Lena came to Daniel while he sat at the fire. "If you want me to go," she said softly, "I will. I don't want you hurt for choosing me." Daniel looked up, eyes tired but fierce. "I didn't choose you because it was easy," he said. "I chose you because it was right." She sat beside him, leaned her head against his shoulder, and in the firelight, the world outside could rage all it wanted. In here, they had chosen each other. Spring came slowly that year. The desert bloomed. In spite of itself, wildflowers clinging to cracks in the rock, green buds trembling against wind-carved hills. The sun no longer scorched but warmed. Life, stubborn and relentless, pressed forward. So did they. It had been nearly 2 months since Brannigan's last attack. Long enough for Daniel to ride into town without stares that lingered too long. Long enough for Emily to start sleeping through the night again. Long enough for Lena to walk the ridge at dawn without glancing over her shoulder. The world hadn't forgotten what they'd done, but it was learning to live with it. So were they. The ranch changed, subtly but surely. Lena now wore her hair loose sometimes, no longer always braided tight in defense. Her clothes were still simple, but hers, not cast-offs, not disguises. She had stitched moccasin soles to her boots, a quiet nod to both worlds. Daniel, once a man who could barely speak more than 3 words at a time, now smiled more, not big or often, but real. His house no longer echoed. His porch bore a second. Rocking chair and Emily? She danced barefoot in the garden, spinning in circles, doll in one hand, a feather in the other. She had started calling Lena Auntie without being told to. And Lena had wept, quietly in the barn behind a bale of hay. Sometimes healing doesn't come like thunder. Sometimes it's just a whisper that says, "You can stay." One warm evening, as they sat by the fire, Lena turned to Daniel. "I was thinking about building something." He raised an eyebrow. "A fence?" She smiled. "A school. Just for a few kids. Apache, settler, mixed. Emily, when she's older. Teach them to read, speak both languages. Maybe even teach the town how to listen." Daniel stirred the fire. "They might not take kindly to that." "They might not," Lena said, "but maybe their children will." Daniel looked at her, long and steady. "You're always thinking further ahead than me." She shrugged. "I've had to." He reached over and took her hand. "Build it. I'll help." They sat that way for a while, fingers twined. No need for more words. Later that week, the sheriff returned, but not with threats or warnings. He brought paperwork. "Town council approved it," he said, clearing his throat. "They'll let you lease the old church schoolhouse. On 2 conditions. You don't segregate and you don't stir trouble." Lena looked at the document, surprised. "That's generous." He scratched his beard. "No one wants another Brannigan. And folks are starting to see what kind of person you are. You're changing minds, even if they won't say it out loud." Daniel stood behind her, hand on her shoulder. "That school's going to do more than just teach letters." The sheriff gave a dry smile. "I reckon it might." He tipped his hat. "Good luck, Miss Lena." It was the first time he'd used her name. A few weeks later, they opened the doors. It wasn't a grand affair, just a small hand-painted sign. A handful of mismatched chairs. Chalkboards made from old window panes. 3 children the first day, Emily, a shy half-Mexican boy named Tomas, and a girl whose father was the town's tanner. Lena wore her best blouse and a belt with her tribe's beadwork. She greeted each child with the same warmth, no matter where they came from. She taught them the alphabet in English and Apache, taught them to listen, to speak clearly, to respect silence and story alike. Daniel stood at the back, arms crossed, a quiet smile playing at the corners of his mouth. That night, as stars bloomed overhead and the wind moved gently across the land, Lena and Daniel stood at the fence line. "You ever think we'd make it here?" Daniel asked. Lena leaned against him. "No, but I hoped." He looked out across the land, quiet, golden in the moonlight, full of life. "What now?" he asked. She turned to him, eyes shining. "Now," she said, "we keep building something better. Something ours." He pulled her close, and in the close stillness of the desert night, under the same sky that had once watched war, they kissed, not out of desperation, not in fear, but in peace. A new beginning, born not of blood, but of love, stubborn, patient, and brave.